Deep beneath the shifting sands of time, hidden beneath layers of stone and secrecy, lie the final resting places of kings and emperors, protected not just by walls, but by nightmares brought to life. Picture this: you're standing in the dim glow of torchlight, surrounded by towering hieroglyphs, the air thick with dust and dread. One wrong move, one misplaced step, and the very ground beneath you could collapse, or worse. This wasn't just paranoia, it was the ultimate game of wits between the living and the dead. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of ancient China, rulers spent fortunes and centuries devising booby traps so clever, so ruthless, they'd make even the boldest tomb raider think twice. But why go to such extremes? It wasn't just about guarding gold or jewels. These traps were a statement, a final declaration of power, a warning carved into stone. Disturb the dead and face the consequences. Think about the sheer creativity behind them. False doors that lead to bottomless pits, corridors rigged with falling boulders, even jars of venomous snakes placed just where a thief's hand might wander. These weren't just barriers, they were puzzles designed to outsmart generations of intruders. And the most fascinating part, many of these traps still work today, waiting silently in the dark, as lethal as the day they were built. So how did ancient engineers pull off such feats without modern technology? What kind of mind designs a trap meant to last millennia? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. In this journey, we'll explore 26 of the most ingenious, terrifying, and downright clever booby traps ever created to protect royal tombs. You'll see how cultures across the world, from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of the Maya, each came up with their own devilish solutions to the same problem. And by the end, you'll understand why these ancient death traps aren't just relics of the past, they're masterpieces of human ingenuity, still whispering their secrets to those brave enough to listen. Ready to step inside? Just watch your step. You never know what's waiting around the next corner. For rulers who saw themselves as gods walking among mortals, death wasn't an end, it was a transition to something even greater. These tombs weren't just holes in the ground filled with riches, they were palaces for the afterlife, designed to mirror the splendor of the ruler's earthly reign. Imagine the mindset. If you spent your life wielding absolute power, why would death be any different? The treasures buried within gold, jewels, sacred artifacts weren't just gifts to the gods, they were necessities for the journey ahead. But with such wealth came danger. Tomb raiders weren't just thieves, they were existential threats, risking the ruler's very eternity by stealing what they needed to navigate the underworld. This fear wasn't unfounded. Historical records from ancient Egypt tell of entire gangs specializing in tomb robbery, some even bribing officials to look the other way. In China, emperors went so far as to execute the workers who built their tombs to keep the locations secret. The stakes couldn't be higher, and so the traps weren't just about punishment, they were about preservation. A curse carved into a wall wasn't just a threat, it was a divine contract, a plea to the gods to unleash their wrath on anyone who dared trespass. Mechanical traps, like the infamous shifting sand tunnels or counterweighted stone slabs, weren't just engineering feats, they were psychological warfare. The goal wasn't just to kill intruders, but to terrify them into turning back, or to ensure those who pressed on never lived to tell the tale. What's fascinating is how these defenses evolved alongside the thieves who challenged them. Early tombs relied on secrecy and simple pitfalls, but as robbers grew bolder, the traps grew more sophisticated. The Egyptians, for example, began designing false burial chambers to waste a thief's time while the real treasures lay hidden behind cleverly disguised passages. In Central America, the Maya incorporated natural elements like underground rivers or unstable limestone to create traps that felt almost alive, as if the earth itself was defending the tomb. And in China, the terracotta army wasn't just a show of force, it was a maze of death, with crossbows rigged to fire at the slightest disturbance. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these traps is how they reflect the values of their creators. A culture that believed in eternal life would see a tomb robber as more than a criminal. They were a destroyer of destinies. That's why some traps weren't just lethal, they were poetic. A thief who died in a collapsing tunnel wasn't just crushed, he was buried alive, mirroring the eternal rest he sought to disrupt. A snake pit wasn't just a hazard, it was a symbol of the chaos that awaited those who defied the divine order. Every mechanism, every curse was a message. This isn't just gold you're stealing, it's a king's very soul. And yet, despite all this ingenuity, tombs were still plundered. That's the irony. The very traps meant to deter thieves became clues, pointing to where the real treasures lay. A hidden door, there must be something behind it. A cursed inscription, that's where the valuables are. It's a testament to human persistence and a reminder that no matter how clever the trap, someone will always be reckless enough to try their luck. But for every tomb that was looted, countless others survived, their secrets intact, waiting for modern archaeologists to uncover them. And when they do, they're not just finding gold or artifacts, they're finding the echoes of an ancient fear, a warning carved in stone that still resonates today. Ancient rulers understood something profound about human nature. That fear could be a far stronger weapon than any blade or barricade. They didn't just build traps to stop thieves, they crafted experiences meant to shatter their resolve. Take the infamous curses inscribed on Egyptian tomb walls, promising agony or death to trespassers. These weren't empty threats, they were masterstrokes of psychological manipulation. Imagine being a tomb raider, already nervous in the suffocating darkness, when your torchlight reveals hieroglyphs warning that the gods would seize your neck like a bird's. Suddenly, every shadow feels alive, every creak of stone sounds like a whisper of doom. Even if you didn't believe in curses, doubt would gnaw at you. And that uncertainty, that was the trap's real power. But it wasn't just about superstition. The sheer unpredictability of these traps played on primal instincts. A corridor might seem safe until a pressure plate triggered a cascade of sand from above, burying intruders alive. The Maya took this further, designing chambers where stepping on the wrong tile would release a torrent of water, flooding the passage within seconds. These weren't just accidents, they were calculated shocks, exploiting the brain's instinct to freeze in panic. Modern studies show that sudden, overwhelming stimuli, like a collapsing ceiling or a hissing snake, can trigger a fight or flight response so intense it clouds judgment. Ancient engineers weaponized that reaction centuries before psychology had a name for it. And then there was the art of misdirection. Some tombs featured obvious traps, like a glaring pit in the center of a hallway, to lure thieves into a false sense of control. They'd sidestep the pit, only to trigger a hidden mechanism in the walls. This played on another quirk of human psychology, our tendency to focus on visible threats while missing subtler dangers. The builders didn't just want to catch intruders. They wanted to outthink them, to prove that even the cleverest thief couldn't match the ingenuity of a king's architects. Perhaps the most chilling aspect was how these traps blurred the line between myth and reality. Stories of cursed tombs spread like wildfire, often encouraged by rulers themselves. A thief who died mysteriously after robbing a tomb wasn't just a casualty, he was a cautionary tale. Communities would whisper about his fate, embellishing details until the tomb itself became a legend. This created a self-sustaining cycle of fear. Even if a trap failed mechanically, its reputation could keep generations of looters away. In the end, these psychological games reveal a deeper truth. The greatest treasures weren't just gold or jewels, but the illusion of invincibility. A ruler's tomb wasn't truly secure unless it lived in the imagination as a place of nightmares. And that's why, thousands of years later, we still shudder at the thought of what might lurk in those ancient halls, not just traps, but the echoes of a mind game played across centuries. The false burial chamber wasn't just a simple trick, it was a masterclass in ancient misdirection. Picture a group of tomb raiders, their hands trembling with anticipation as they pry open a sealed doorway, only to find a room filled with modest trinkets and an empty sarcophagus. The disappointment would be crushing, but more importantly, it would blind them to the truth. Behind a seemingly solid wall, concealed beneath layers of plaster and paint, the real treasures lay undisturbed. This psychological play was far more sophisticated than it seemed. By giving thieves a small victory, the architects ensured they'd stop digging deeper, convinced they'd already hit the jackpot. Some of these decoy chambers were so convincing, they even featured fake burial rituals, scattered bones, broken pottery, and hastily painted murals suggesting a rushed or secondary burial. In the Valley of the Kings, archaeologists have discovered false chambers with intricate carvings, as if to say, yes, this was important enough to decorate, but not important enough to guard. It was the ultimate bait and switch, and the brilliance didn't stop there. Many of these decoy rooms were deliberately unstable, their ceilings rigged to collapse if disturbed too much. Thieves would waste hours chiseling through a false wall, only to bring the entire room down on themselves, a grim reward for their persistence. What makes this tactic so fascinating is how it preyed on human greed. The architects knew that tomb raiders, once they found something of value, would be less likely to keep searching. It's the same principle behind a magician's sleight of hand: distract with one thing while the real action happens elsewhere. And in some cases, the deception went even deeper. Certain tombs featured multiple false chambers, each one slightly more convincing than the last, leading thieves on a labyrinthine wild goose chase until they either gave up or met their end in a hidden pit or sand trap. The false burial chamber also reveals something profound about how ancient cultures viewed the afterlife. To them, the tomb wasn't just a storage unit for treasures, it was a sacred space, a bridge between worlds. By tricking thieves into desecrating a decoy, they preserved the sanctity of the real burial site. It wasn't just about protecting gold, it was about protecting the dead's journey into eternity. And in that sense, these empty rooms were anything but worthless. They were the first line of defense in a war against time itself. Now imagine walking down a narrow passage, your torch flickering against walls carved with silent warnings, when suddenly a faint click beneath your foot. Before you can react, the ceiling above you groans, then collapses in a thunderous roar of dust and debris. This wasn't just bad luck, it was cold, calculated engineering. The collapsing ceiling trap was one of the most straightforward yet devastating defenses ever devised. Ancient builders didn't need complex machinery, just a keen understanding of physics and a ruthless grasp of human nature. The genius lay in its simplicity. Engineers would weaken key support beams or install counterweights disguised as ordinary ceiling stones. A single misstep could trigger a hidden mechanism, releasing tons of rock in an instant. Some designs even used sand-filled cavities above the ceiling to disturb the wrong tile, and the sand would pour out, destabilizing the entire structure. The result, a tomb that literally buried its own intruders, turning their greed into their grave. But what made this trap so psychologically effective was its inevitability. Unlike a pit or a snake strike, a collapsing ceiling offered no chance to dodge or retreat. The moment that trigger was activated, doom was already falling. Archaeologists in Egypt's Valley of the Kings have found skeletons crushed mid-flight, their bones frozen in futile attempts to escape. These weren't just accidents, they were executions, swift and merciless. And the terror didn't end with the collapse, the dust-choked darkness, the suffocating weight of stone. It was a fate worse than quick death. Ancient texts describe tomb curses warning of the sky falling upon the wicked, suggesting these traps were as much about symbolism as security. To be buried alive in a king's tomb wasn't just punishment, it was poetic justice mirroring the eternal rest the thieves sought to plunder. Remarkably, some of these traps remain deadly even now. In 2012, researchers using ground-penetrating radar in a Mayan pyramid discovered hollow chambers above a sealed passage, a dormant collapse trap still primed after centuries. It's a chilling reminder these weren't just barriers, they were timeless sentinels engineered to outlast empires, and that's the true horror of the collapsing ceiling. It wasn't designed to deter, it was designed to remember. Sand doesn't just bury, it swallows. Imagine creeping through a tomb's narrow passage, your torch flickering against walls that seem to breathe, when suddenly the ground beneath you gives way. Not with a crash, but with a whisper, your feet sink into what feels like solid stone until it isn't. The more you struggle, the faster you're pulled under, grains pouring into your mouth and nose as the weight of an entire hidden reservoir presses down. This was the shifting sand trap, nature's own weapon turned against tomb raiders. Unlike spikes or falling stones, sand didn't just kill, it erased. The brilliance of this trap lay in its brutal simplicity. Builders would hollow out spaces beneath walkways or behind thin stone facades, filling them with tons of fine, dry sand. When triggered by a misplaced step or a cleverly disguised pressure plate, the barrier would rupture, unleashing a silent flood. Some designs used angled corridors to funnel sand like an hourglass, quickly burying intruders up to their necks. Others created false floors that collapsed entirely, dropping victims into deep pits where struggling only hastened their demise. And because sand flows like liquid, it left no visible warnings. A thief could inspect every inch of a hallway and never suspect the death lurking inches below his feet. What made sand so terrifying was its inevitability. Once you triggered the trap, physics took over. Unlike a dart or a blade, there was nothing to dodge, just an unstoppable tide rising around you. Ancient engineers understood something profound about panic, that the slower the threat, the worse the fear. A falling boulder ends things quickly, but sand. It gives you time to scream, to claw at walls that offer no purchase, to feel the air being squeezed from your lungs. Archaeologists in Egypt's Valley of the Kings have found tunnels still packed with sand, their ceilings studded with hooks likely placed to snag clothing or tools, ensuring no one escaped the trap's grip. But the most chilling detail, these traps didn't just kill, they vanished their victims. A corpse buried in sand dries into a natural mummy, preserved but invisible. Unlike bones scattered by animal traps or skeletons pinned under rocks, sand left no trace. It was the perfect crime scene cleaner, wiping away intruders as if they'd never existed. This served a dual purpose. It protected the tomb's location by removing witnesses, and it fed into the mythos of cursed sites where trespassers simply disappeared. And the sand trap had one final, merciless advantage. Time was on its side. While metal mechanisms rusted and ropes rotted, sand never degraded. A 3,000-year-old trap would work as flawlessly as the day it was built. In 2018, radar scans of a Mayan pyramid revealed hollow chambers filled with loose sediment, proof that even now, some traps still wait, patient and hungry, for the next foolhardy soul to take that fatal step. Among all the traps designed to punish greed, none were as insidious as the poisoned needle. Picture a thief's trembling fingers brushing against a golden door handle, his heart pounding with anticipation only to feel the faintest sting. At first, it seems like nothing, a pinprick, a momentary annoyance, but within minutes his vision blurs, his muscles lock. By the time he realizes what's happened, it's already too late. No crashing boulders, no roaring floods, just silence, and a corpse slumped in the shadows. This was death at its most intimate, a whisper instead of a scream. The genius of the poisoned needle lay in its invisibility. Unlike gaping pits or obvious pressure plates, a needle could be hidden anywhere, embedded in a chest's lock, protruding from a wall fresco, even disguised as part of a statue's jewelry. Ancient artisans perfected the art of camouflage, ensuring the needle blended seamlessly into its surroundings. Some were so finely crafted, they resembled decorative engravings until touched at just the wrong angle. And the poisons, they were as varied as they were vile. Egyptian texts describe coatings derived from the venom of horned vipers, causing paralysis so complete, victims couldn't even cry for help. In South America, the Maya used toxins from poisoned dart frogs, so potent that a single drop could stop a heart mid-beat. But perhaps the most terrifying versions weren't designed to kill at all. Certain cultures employed hallucinogenic compounds, turning tombs into houses of madness. Imagine a thief pricking his finger, only to have the walls around him begin to pulse and twist. Shadows would morph into grasping hands, whispers would echo from empty corridors enough to send even the bravest intruder fleeing in terror, convinced the tomb itself was alive. These traps weren't just lethal, they were psychological masterpieces, weaponizing fear as effectively as any blade. What made the poisoned needle uniquely cruel was its patience. Unlike collapsing ceilings or sand traps, which acted immediately, some toxins took hours to fully take effect. A looter might leave the tomb feeling triumphant, only to collapse miles away, his fate forever a mystery to his companions. This delayed reaction served a chilling purpose. It severed the connection between crime and consequence, making the tomb seem cursed rather than trapped. Stories would spread of thieves dying days later with no visible wounds, their skin unmarked, fueling legends of supernatural vengeance. And then there was the trap's grim efficiency. A single needle could be reused indefinitely, needing only a fresh coat of poison to remain deadly. Unlike mechanical traps that wore out or required resetting, this was a self-sustaining killer. Archaeologists in China's terracotta warrior pits have found hollow bronze figures with finger joints concealing needle slots, suggesting even statues could become silent assassins. The message was clear: touch nothing, trust nothing, because in a royal tomb, even beauty could be a weapon. Yet the poisoned needle's greatest strength was also its weakness. Over time, toxins degraded or careless handlers accidentally pricked themselves during maintenance. But when it worked, it left no evidence, no broken mechanisms, just a body and a warning etched in flesh rather than stone. In the end, that's what made it so haunting. Other traps roared. This one simply watched, waited, and let human nature do the rest. There's a reason snakes slithered their way into the nightmares of tomb raiders across ancient civilizations. They were the perfect guardians. Silent, swift, and lethally efficient, these creatures turned sacred burial chambers into death traps where a single misstep could mean agony. In Egypt, where the asp was both feared and revered, priests would place baskets of the venomous snakes near treasure chambers. The moment a thief's shadow crossed the threshold, the disturbed serpents would strike, their bites delivering a toxin so potent, victims often died before they could flee. But the real horror wasn't just the snakes, it was the cruelty behind their placement. Some were deliberately starved for weeks, their aggression honed to a razor's edge. Others were trained to respond to vibrations, lying coiled in sand-filled pits until footsteps sent them lunging upward like living spears. The psychological terror of these pits can't be overstated. Unlike mechanical traps which followed predictable patterns, snakes moved with eerie unpredictability. A thief might scan the floor for pressure plates or dodge falling stones, but how do you evade something that slithers in the dark, striking from angles you never anticipated? The Maya took this fear to another level, engineering entire chambers where the walls themselves seemed alive. Hidden recesses held vipers that could be released by tugging on a wrongfully taken artifact, as if the treasures themselves fought back. And in some Chinese tombs, hollow bronze statues concealed serpents within their hollow limbs disturbed the statue, and a flickering tongue would be the last thing a looter ever saw. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect of snake pits was their reputation. Word traveled fast among thieves, and the mere rumor of a tomb guarded by serpents was often enough to keep intruders away. Ancient engineers understood that sometimes the best traps were the ones that didn't need to be triggered. A single snake skeleton found at a tomb's entrance could spawn tales of cursed grounds, weaving a mythos far more potent than any physical barrier. Even the symbols left behind, carved serpents on doorways or mosaics of intertwined vipers, served as silent warnings, their message clear: enter and embrace a death that writhes in the dark. What's chilling is how enduring this fear remains. Modern archaeologists still approach certain tombs with caution, knowing that while centuries may have passed, venom doesn't expire. In 2019, researchers in Honduras discovered a subterranean chamber where the air itself carried the faint, musky scent of reptiles, a scent that sent their local guides fleeing before a single snake was even spotted. It's a testament to the primal dread these creatures inspired, a dread that ancient cultures weaponized with brutal creativity. Because in the end, the greatest traps weren't just about killing intruders. They were about making them hesitate, their hands shaking too violently to even reach for the gold. Imagine walking down a dimly lit tomb corridor, your shoulder brushing against the wall, then hearing a faint metallic snick before searing pain erupts across your arm. That split-second moment was all it took. Hidden blades weren't just traps, they were ambushes in metal form, springing from walls, floors, even ceilings with lethal precision. Unlike falling boulders or sand pits, these devices didn't rely on brute force. They were surgical, almost elegant in their cruelty. A pressure plate no larger than your palm could unleash a scything blade sharp enough to cleave bone, its edge honed to mirror brightness by artisans who likely never imagined their craft would be used this way. The engineering behind these traps reveals a chilling attention to detail. In some Egyptian tombs, blades were mounted on bronze hinges, tensioned with twisted animal sinew that retained its springiness for centuries. Chinese emperors favored mechanisms where stepping on a disguised floor tile would release a blade with the speed of a striking serpent, angled precisely to slice arteries or hamstring fleeing intruders. But perhaps the most unsettling designs came from the Maya, who embedded obsidian blades into statues' outstretched hands. Approached too close, and what appeared to be a ceremonial gesture became a death stroke, the volcanic glass sharp enough to leave wounds that barely bled until it was too late. What made hidden blades uniquely terrifying was their intimacy. A collapsing ceiling crushed impersonally, but a blade, it chose its victim. Some were positioned at throat height, others at groin level, each placement a calculated psychological blow. Archaeologists in Crete's labyrinthine tombs found skeletons with clean, diagonal cuts through their ribs, evidence of blades that swung in arcs, not just straight lines, making them impossible to dodge in tight spaces. And in a macabre twist, certain traps were designed to wound rather than kill immediately, leaving intruders to bleed out slowly. This served a dual purpose. The dying thief's screams would deter others, and their thrashing might trigger additional traps in the confined passage. But the true horror lay in the blade's silence. Unlike rumbling stones or hissing sand, these mechanisms gave no warning. You wouldn't know you'd triggered one until you felt the cold kiss of metal parting flesh. Some cultures amplified this dread by coating blades in substances that burned like fire, not just poison, but irritants like crushed blister beetles or quicklime dust that turned wounds into waking nightmares. A thief might survive the initial cut only to succumb to infection days later, his skin peeling away in sheets. Yet for all their lethality, hidden blades had one flaw: they were high maintenance. Over centuries, hinges rusted, springs weakened, and dust clogged mechanisms. That's why the most successful ones were often the simplest, like the toe-taker blades found in certain Mesopotamian tombs, designed to snap upward when a tripwire was disturbed. No fancy mechanics, just a weighted bronze blade on a pivot, forever poised to swing. Even today, conservators handling these artifacts wear Kevlar gloves. Because while the tombs may be long empty, some traps still remember how to bite. One of the cruelest tricks hidden in ancient tombs wasn't above you, it was underfoot. The false floor was a masterclass in exploiting human complacency. Picture this: you're tiptoeing through a burial chamber, eyes darting to every shadowy corner, convinced the danger lurks in the walls or ceiling. Then, without warning, the ground vanishes beneath you, that solid stone you'd been standing on. It was never stone at all, just a thin veneer of plaster and paint stretched over a yawning pit. The drop could be 20 feet or more, ending in a forest of bronze spikes, a pool of stagnant water, or worse. Archaeologists in Mycenae once uncovered a shaft where the bones at the bottom showed signs of gnawing, evidence that some traps were designed not just to kill, but to feed. The mechanics were diabolically simple. Some false floors used counterweights step in the wrong spot, and the entire section tilted like a seesaw, dumping intruders into the darkness. Others relied on brittle materials, layers of reed or rotted wood disguised under a convincing coat of dust and grime. But the most chilling designs were the self-resetting ones. In certain Chinese tombs, pits were lined with sloping sides and sand-filled chambers. The victim would fall, their weight triggering a release that allowed the sand to flow back, repositioning the false floor for the next unlucky soul. It was a trap that literally covered its own tracks, leaving no trace of the horrors beneath. What made the false floor so effective wasn't just its lethality, it was the psychology behind it. Tomb architects knew that after navigating a gauntlet of wall-mounted blades or ceiling traps, thieves would grow complacent about the one surface they trusted implicitly: the ground. This trap preyed on that false sense of security. Even the most cautious raider, poking every wall with a 10-foot pole, might never think to tap the floor beneath his boots. And the consequences were immediate. Unlike slow-acting poisons or distant cave-ins, a false floor delivered instant judgment. One moment you were a thief, the next you were a warning to those who followed. The variations were as creative as they were gruesome. In Persia, some pits contained quicklime, a substance that reacted violently with moisture, essentially melting flesh on contact. Egyptian engineers favored pits filled with scorpions, their venomous stingers ensuring that even a survivable fall became a death sentence. But perhaps the most haunting discovery came from a Mayan pyramid in Belize, where a false floor concealed a natural sinkhole. Victims didn't just die, they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the earth as if the gods themselves had reached up to claim them. What's chilling is how these traps blurred the line between engineering and artistry. The best false floors weren't just functional, they were theatrical. Some bore intricate mosaics or carvings, distractions meant to occupy the eye while the real danger lay unseen. Others used sound, hollow spaces beneath the panels, amplifying footsteps to mask the telltale creak of stressed materials. It was a reminder that these builders weren't just technicians. They were psychologists, crafting experiences designed to exploit every human weakness. And in that, they succeeded spectacularly. Even today, archaeologists tread lightly in unexplored tombs, knowing that the greatest threat might not be what's hidden in the walls, but what's been sleeping beneath their feet for millennia. Few traps in history combined sheer brutality with theatrical cruelty, quite like the boiling oil or tar trap. Imagine creeping through a narrow passage, your back pressed against cold stone, when suddenly a hissing sound overhead. Before you can react, a torrent of scalding liquid cascades down, searing your skin and filling the air with choking black smoke. This wasn't just a barrier, it was a slow, deliberate execution. Ancient engineers didn't just want intruders dead, they wanted them to remember dying. The mechanics were horrifyingly simple, yet required precise planning. In Egyptian tombs, archaeologists have found clay pipes lining ceilings, designed to funnel boiling oil from hidden reservoirs the moment a tripwire was disturbed. The Maya took it further, using natural tar pits heated by subterranean geothermal vents, a gruesome marriage of nature and human ingenuity. But the most infamous examples come from Chinese imperial tombs, where bronze cauldrons suspended above doorways could tip at the pull of a lever, raining molten metal onto anyone below. The heat alone was lethal, but the real horror was the aftermath. Oil and tar clung to skin, continuing to burn long after the initial splash, while fumes robbed victims of breath, turning their final moments into a suffocating nightmare. What made this trap so psychologically devastating was its inescapability. A falling boulder might crush you instantly. A poisoned needle offered at least the illusion of a quick end. But boiling liquid, it transformed the tomb itself into an oven. Survivors, rare as they were, described walls too hot to touch, floors slick with molten residue, and air so thick with smoke, even retreat became impossible. Some tombs amplified the effect by sloping corridors downward, ensuring the scalding tide chased intruders as they fled. And then there was the symbolism. In cultures where fire represented purification, boiling oil wasn't just a weapon, it was a darkly poetic judgment. A thief who died this way wasn't merely killed, he was cleansed, his sins burned away in agony. This theatrical cruelty served a dual purpose. It punished the trespasser while reinforcing the tomb's sacred inviolability. Even the smell had a role. Charred flesh and acrid tar lingered for decades, a visceral warning to anyone who followed. Remarkably, evidence suggests some of these traps were reusable. In 2014, researchers in Turkey discovered a Roman-era burial complex with a network of lead pipes still stained with organic residue. Lab tests confirmed it was olive oil likely heated in nearby chambers and released via gravity. The system could be reset with relative ease, making it one of history's earliest examples of renewable security. But perhaps the most chilling detail is how these traps blurred the line between defense and ritual. In some cultures, boiling oil mirrored the underworld's torments, a preview of the fate awaiting those who disrupted the dead. It wasn't enough to stop thieves, they had to suffer as an example, and in that, these architects succeeded beyond measure, because even now, centuries later, the mere idea of being boiled alive in a tomb's depths strikes a primal fear, one that no amount of gold could ever outweigh. The most insidious killers are the ones you never see coming, and nothing proves that more terrifyingly than the silent, creeping horror of the deadly gas trap. Imagine this: after hours of painstakingly picking through a tomb's entrance, Your torch finally illuminates the treasure chamber ahead. The air feels heavy, maybe a little stale, but nothing out of the ordinary for a space sealed for centuries. You take a few steps forward, your heart racing with anticipation, and then, without warning, your vision blurs. Your limbs grow leaden. By the time you realize something's wrong, it's already too late. Your lungs refuse to draw breath, your muscles betray you, and darkness swallows you whole. No blades, no collapsing ceilings, just an invisible hand squeezing the life from your body. This was death at its most impersonal, and perhaps its most cruel. Ancient engineers harnessed nature's deadliest forces to create these gas chambers, turning the very air into a weapon. In Egypt, some tombs were lined with layers of rotting organic matter, animal carcasses, spoiled grain, or even human waste sealed in airtight side chambers. When intruders broke in, oxygen mixed with the built-up methane and hydrogen sulfide, creating a cocktail of toxins that could knock a man unconscious in seconds. The Greeks took a more deliberate approach, venting volcanic fumes into burial sites through hidden pipes, ensuring the gases were fresh and lethal for centuries. But the most chilling examples come from China, where alchemists prepared arsenic-laced compounds that released odorless, tasteless vapors when disturbed. These weren't just accidents of decay, they were meticulously engineered death sentences. What made gas traps so psychologically devastating was their utter lack of spectacle. Other traps roared to life with falling stones or hissing sand. A gas offered no warning. Victims often didn't even realize they were in danger until their vision tunneled and their knees buckled. Some mixtures, like those derived from certain fungi, induced vivid hallucinations before death. Imagine breathing in what seems like ordinary air, only to suddenly see the tomb walls writhe with phantom figures or hear voices whispering from the shadows. These weren't just killers, they were instruments of madness designed to erase rational thought before erasing life itself. The true genius of these traps lay in their aftermath. Unlike mechanical devices that left obvious triggers or damage, a gas chamber left no trace. A team of tomb raiders could enter together, collapse one by one, and later explorers would find only a scene frozen in time, bodies mid-step, tools still clutched in stiff hands, faces twisted in silent screams. It created an aura of supernatural dread, fueling legends of cursed tombs where the very breath was poison. Even the gases themselves played a role in preservation. Hydrogen sulfide slows decomposition, meaning some victims looked eerily untouched, as if they died moments before discovery rather than centuries prior. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how these traps evolved alongside human curiosity. Early gas chambers relied on natural decay, but as robbers grew wiser to the dangers of sealed spaces, engineers got creative. In Central America, the Maya built tombs atop geothermal vents, letting sulfur dioxide seep through porous stones, a trap that never depleted. Roman mausoleums sometimes featured hollow statues filled with quicklime. Break one open, and the chemical reaction released choking clouds of calcium oxide. These weren't static hazards, they were puzzles that adapted, ensuring the tomb's secrets died with every generation of thieves. And then there's the grim irony. Many of these gases were substances the ancients themselves feared in life. Arsenic was the assassin's tool, volcanic fumes the breath of angry gods. By weaponizing them in death, rulers turned their tombs into microcosms of the underworld's terrors. A final, brutal reminder that some thresholds were never meant to be crossed. Even today, archaeologists test the air in newly opened tombs, knowing that the deadliest traps aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes, the greatest danger is simply taking a breath. The rolling boulder trap wasn't just a death machine, it was a force of nature unleashed in stone. Picture this, deep inside a tomb's winding passage, your torch flickers against walls carved with warnings you ignored. Then a faint click echoes from somewhere ahead. Before you can process the sound, the ground begins to tremble. A deafening rumble builds, growing louder, closer, until the corridor ahead erupts with a massive sphere of stone, barreling toward you with unstoppable momentum. There's no outrunning it, no hiding, just the crushing certainty that in seconds you'll be reduced to a bloody smear on the very tomb you came to rob. This wasn't just Hollywood fantasy. In the real tombs of ancient Central America, engineers carved boulders to fit snugly within corridors, sometimes weighting them with lead cores to ensure they'd gain terrifying speed on slopes. The Maya perfected a version using limestone spheres, polished smooth to roll effortlessly, but the true genius lay in the triggers. Some were activated by tripwires disguised as decorative ropes or murals. Others used counterweights, steal the wrong artifact, and the balance would shift, sending the boulder careening downhill. The Inca took it further, designing entire chambers where the floor tilted when stepped on, transforming the room itself into a launch ramp for destruction. What made the rolling boulder so psychologically devastating was its theatricality. Unlike silent poison needles or invisible gases, this trap announced itself. The roar of stone against stone, the vibration in the floor, it was a sensory onslaught designed to paralyze with dread. Victims had just enough time to realize their fate, to feel the rush of air as the boulder closed in before impact. Archaeologists in Honduras found a tomb corridor lined with bizarre indentations, later realized to be the imprints of a boulder that had rolled back and forth for centuries, pulverizing bones to dust with each pass. But the boulder's legacy wasn't just about brute force. Its design revealed a dark understanding of human instinct. Narrow corridors forced intruders into single file, eliminating any chance to dodge sideways. Curved passages hid the boulder until it was too late, playing on the brain's inability to process sudden, massive threats in tight spaces. Even the aftermath served a purpose. Crushed bodies were grotesque billboards, warning others to turn back. And then there's the irony. Many of these boulders were originally part of the tomb's construction, repurposed as traps once the burial was complete. A single stone might seal a doorway for eternity, then become a weapon against those who tried to breach it. Today, explorers still find these silent sentinels resting at the bottom of slopes, some still balanced precariously, as if waiting for one last victim. Because unlike other traps that decayed, a boulder never lost its edge. It didn't need poison or sharpened spikes, just gravity, and the arrogance of thieves who thought they could outrun history. The arrow loophole wasn't just a trap, it was an entire battlefield condensed into the cramped darkness of a tomb corridor. Imagine creeping forward, your body pressed against cold stone, when suddenly the wall beside you erupts with a chorus of twanging strings. Arrows slice through the air from every direction, some fired at knee height to cripple, others aimed squarely at your chest. There's no cover, no retreat. Just the sickening realization that the walls themselves have turned against you. What made these traps so devastating was their marriage of simplicity and precision. Ancient engineers carved narrow slots into the stone at strategic angles, each one perfectly positioned to turn a hallway into a kill zone. In China's tomb complexes, archaeologists have found intricate pulley systems where a single tripwire could unleash a staggered volley, first from the left, then the right, then overhead, creating an inescapable crossfire. Some designs even used bamboo tubing to guide arrows silently into place, ensuring the first warning was the sound of fletching, whistling toward flesh. But the true horror lay in the reload mechanisms. Unlike a single shot trap, these systems were built for endurance. Strings and counterweights allowed arrows to reset automatically, meaning every step forward risked triggering another barrage. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, hidden chambers beside corridors held stacks of pre-loaded bows, their strings kept taut with animal sinew that resisted decay. The Maya took it further, embedding obsidian-tipped projectiles into hollow statues pulled the wrong artifact, and the figure's outstretched hands became improvised launchers, firing at point-blank range. The psychology behind these traps was just as calculated as their engineering. Arrow slots were often camouflaged as decorative carvings or ventilation holes, playing on the human tendency to overlook small details in shadowy spaces. And unlike collapsing ceilings or sand traps, which killed indiscriminately, arrows could be aimed to wound first. A thief might survive an initial volley only to bleed out slowly, his screams serving as a deterrent for others. What's chilling is how these systems mirrored real warfare. The Qin dynasty's terracotta warrior pits contained actual crossbows rigged to fire, if disturbed, a direct translation of battlefield tactics to the afterlife. Even the arrows themselves carried symbolism. Bronze tips were often inscribed with curses, turning each projectile into a physical manifestation of divine wrath. And then there's the lingering menace. While sand traps buried their victims and poison needles left no trace, arrow loopholes preserved their violence. Centuries later, archaeologists still find shafts embedded in walls, their iron heads rusted but still lethal looking. Some corridors are littered with the bones of those who didn't flee fast enough, their skeletons pinned like macabre trophies to the stone. It's a reminder that in these tombs, death didn't just wait, it hunted. Nothing plays with the mind quite like the sensation of rising water, the creeping certainty that with each passing second, the air in your lungs grows more precious and escape more impossible. The drowning chamber wasn't just a trap, it was a slow-motion nightmare engineered to turn the tomb itself into a liquid coffin. Picture this. You've just pried open a sealed doorway, your fingers slick with sweat, when a distant gurgle echoes through the corridor. Before you can react, icy water surges around your ankles, then your knees, rising with terrifying speed, the exit sealed behind you by some hidden mechanism. The walls smooth as glass, offering no handholds. All you can do is watch as the water climbs toward the ceiling, your own breath becoming the countdown to oblivion. Ancient engineers harnessed water's relentless power in ways that still unsettle modern archaeologists. In Egypt's coastal tombs, builders carved narrow channels connecting burial chambers to the sea, hidden beneath layers of stone. Disturb the wrong artifact, and these conduits would burst open, flooding the space in minutes. But the real genius lay in the timing. Some were designed to coincide with high tide, ensuring the tomb refilled naturally, resetting the trap for the next intruder. The Maya took it further, constructing reservoirs above underground complexes. Trigger a pressure plate, and a carefully balanced stone would tip, unleashing a deluge from above. Divers exploring these sites today still find skeletons pinned to ceilings by the force of the incoming water, their bones arranged in frantic, clawing poses. What made the drowning chamber uniquely horrifying was its psychological torture. Unlike a crushing boulder or venomous snake, water killed slowly, giving victims agonizing minutes to regret every choice that led them there. Engineers amplified this dread by designing chambers that filled unevenly. Water might rise to chest height and pause, lulling thieves into false hope before surging again. Others used labyrinthine layouts where escape routes doubled back into dead ends, turning the tomb into a liquid maze. Even the acoustics played a role. Screams echoed eerily underwater, muffled yet unmistakable, a chorus of warnings for anyone who might follow. The most chilling examples weren't just traps, they were metaphors. In cultures where water symbolized purification or the afterlife's boundary, drowning wasn't just execution, it was ritual. Chinese imperial tombs sometimes featured intricate murals of ocean deities beside the flooding mechanisms, as if the gods themselves were reclaiming the intruders. A thief didn't just die, he was swallowed by the very element that ferried souls to the underworld. And then there's the grim efficiency of these systems. Unlike mechanical traps requiring maintenance, water defenses often relied on nature's permanence. A canal fed by underground springs would never run dry. A tidal chamber would reset twice daily until the end of time. Archaeologists in Greece once discovered a tomb where the drowning mechanism still functioned flawlessly after 3,000 years, its stone sluice gates worn smooth by endless cycles of salt water. It's a reminder that some fears are timeless and some traps, once set, never truly sleep. The false door with spikes was a masterpiece of cruel deception, blending theatrical misdirection with brutal efficiency. Imagine standing before an ornate doorway, its surface carved with promises of untold riches just beyond. Your hands tremble as you push against the wood, then, in a split second, the illusion shatters. Metal glints in the torchlight as rows of spikes erupt from the frame, punching through flesh with mechanical precision. Some doors didn't just stab, they swung, transforming into spiked battering rams that crushed victims against the opposite wall. This wasn't just a trap, it was a betrayal, weaponizing the very moment of triumph to deliver agony. Archaeologists have uncovered these horrors from the deserts of Persia to the jungles of Cambodia, each culture adding its own twist. In Egypt, false doors often mimicked the sacred thresholds of the afterlife, their spikes concealed behind gilded hieroglyphs. The Maya crafted doors that appeared to open inward, only to reveal jagged obsidian shards that shot outward when pressure was applied. But the most chilling designs were those that delayed the attack. Chinese imperial tombs used counterweighted systems where the spikes extended slowly, giving thieves just enough time to relax before impalement. The psychological torment was calculated. Let them believe they'd won, then rip that certainty away. What made this trap uniquely devastating was its intimacy. Unlike a collapsing ceiling or rolling boulder, the false door required the victim's active participation, their own hands sealing their fate. Survivors, rare as they were, described spikes angled upward to maximize suffering, piercing organs without granting the mercy of instant death. Some doors even featured secondary triggers, a latch that released a second wave of spikes when the victim stumbled backward, ensuring no escape. But the real genius lay in the false door's symbolism. In cultures where doorways represented transitions between worlds, violating one wasn't just theft, it was sacrilege. The spikes weren't merely weapons, they were the teeth of the underworld itself, biting down on those who dared cross uninvited. Modern conservators in Turkey found one such door still slick with iron oxide stains after millennia, its spikes arranged in patterns resembling snarling jaws. A warning, a punishment, and a grotesque work of art, all in one vicious mechanism. And then there's the grim irony. Many of these doors led nowhere. Behind them lay solid stone or empty shafts, a final mockery of the greed that brought intruders there. The treasure wasn't hidden beyond the door. It was the door, its very allure, the deadliest trap of all. Even now, explorers approach ornate thresholds with ice in their veins, knowing that beauty in a tomb is often just a mask for death. Few traps played with human hope as cruelly as the crushing walls, a slow, inevitable nightmare where escape always seemed just out of reach. Imagine this. You've just stepped into a narrow corridor when the walls shudder to life, grinding inward with the weight of the earth itself. At first, it's barely noticeable, a fraction of an inch, a whisper of stone against stone. You quicken your pace, convinced you can outwalk it, but the gap narrows, pressing against your shoulders, then your ribs, until every breath becomes a struggle against unyielding rock. That was the trap's true horror. It didn't just kill, it made you watch death creep closer, second by agonizing second. Archaeological evidence reveals just how calculated these mechanisms were. In ancient Persia, engineers used counterweights and pulley systems to ensure the walls moved at a deliberate, torturous pace. Just fast enough to outmatch a panicked sprint, but slow enough to let victims feel every inch of their doom. The Maya built their versions with sloping tracks, so the walls didn't just close, they descended, adding the crushing weight of gravity to the equation. But perhaps the most chilling examples come from Egyptian tombs, where the walls were lined with hieroglyphs depicting the god Anubis stretching out skeletal hands, a visual countdown to the moment the stones would meet and the corridor became a coffin. The psychological warfare here was masterful. Unlike sudden traps that ended things quickly, the crushing walls preyed on the human instinct to fight until the last second. Thieves would claw at the stone, wedge tools into gaps, even sacrifice limbs in desperate attempts to slip free. Some designs amplified this torment by leaving one end of the corridor open, a taunting glimpse of escape that remained forever out of reach. Archaeologists in Crete found skeletons still clutching bronze daggers, their blades reduced to twisted shards from futile attempts to halt the wall's advance. And then there's the symbolism. In cultures where the afterlife was a journey, the crushing walls mirrored the narrowing path to salvation, a physical manifestation of judgment. To be caught between them wasn't just an accident, it was divine retribution, the very universe rejecting the intruder's presence. Modern explorers in Central America have discovered walls decorated with spirals and labyrinths, as if to say the victim's fate was written long before they took their first step inside. What's terrifying is how these traps defied time. While ropes rotted and metals corroded, stone endured. Even today, some corridors bear parallel grooves in the floor, silent testimony to walls that once moved and might still if triggered. It's a reminder that in these tombs, death wasn't just a threat. It was a patient, relentless force waiting centuries for the chance to close its grip. Fire wasn't just a weapon in these tombs. It was a final, furious act of defiance. Imagine creeping through a burial chamber, your torch casting flickering shadows when suddenly the air itself seems to ignite. A deafening roar fills the space as flames erupt from hidden channels in the walls, licking across the ceiling like living things. Within seconds, the temperature soars to unbearable levels, your skin blistering even as you scramble backward. But there's no escape. The fire isn't just burning, it's hunting, fueled by carefully placed reservoirs of oil or pockets of trapped methane gas. This wasn't just a trap, it was a funeral pyre meant to consume thieves alongside the secrets they came to steal. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of these nightmarish designs across continents. In Egypt's most elaborate tombs, narrow channels lined with oil-soaked linen ran parallel to corridors, disturb a concealed trigger, and a single spark would send fire racing through the entire network like a fuse. The Maya took a more geological approach, building tombs atop natural gas vents that could be uncapped by removing a ceremonial plug. But the most chilling examples come from Chinese imperial tombs, where flint and steel mechanisms were hidden inside statues' hollow eyes. Brush against one the wrong way, and the resulting spark would ignite airborne oil mist, creating a fireball so intense it carbonized bones in seconds. What made the fire trap uniquely terrifying was its dual purpose. Unlike spikes or boulders which simply killed, fire erased, it reduced stolen artifacts to slag, melted precious metals into unrecognizable lumps, and turned scrolls full of ancient wisdom to ash. Some designs even ensured the destruction was slow, smoldering materials that filled the tomb with thick, choking smoke over hours. forcing intruders to either flee empty-handed or suffocate in the dark. Excavations in Cappadocia have revealed chambers where the walls still bear blackened streaks from chemical fires that burned without oxygen, a technology so advanced it feels ripped from modern warfare. The psychology behind these traps was as calculated as their engineering. Fire held sacred significance in many cultures. It purified, it transformed, it bridged the mortal world and the divine. To die by fire in a tomb wasn't just punishment, it was perverse ritual, a thief's greed consumed by the same element that carried offerings to the gods. Some tombs amplified this symbolism with murals depicting fiery deities, their outstretched arms positioned exactly where the flames would erupt, a warning and a prophecy in one. And then there's the grim efficiency of fire as a lasting deterrent. While other traps might fail over time, ropes rotting, blades dulling, combustible materials often became more volatile with age. Dry linens turned to tinder, oil residues thickened into sticky gels, and methane pockets grew more concentrated. In 2016, a team in Peru had to evacuate a newly opened tomb when ancient chemical residues reacted with fresh air, causing spontaneous ignition. It's a reminder that some defenses don't just endure, they hibernate, waiting centuries for the perfect moment to roar back to life. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how these traps mirrored their creators' desperation. Fire wasn't just a barrier, it was a declaration. If a ruler couldn't take his treasures into the afterlife, he'd ensure no one else enjoyed them in this world either. The scorch marks on those walls aren't just scars, they're the fingerprints of fury, etched in soot and spite across millennia, because in the end, these weren't just traps. They were the last furious words of kings who refused to be forgotten. Nothing plays on human instinct quite like the illusion of safety, and the illusory staircase weaponized that trust with chilling precision. Imagine carefully descending what appears to be a perfectly ordinary set of stone steps, each one worn smooth by time, when suddenly the fifth stair gives way beneath your foot. For a heart-stopping moment, the world tilts not because you slipped, but because the entire step pivots like a lever, hurling you backward into a gaping void. That's the genius of this trap. It didn't just collapse, it participated, transforming an object designed for stability into an instrument of betrayal. Archaeologists have uncovered these death traps from the pyramids of Mesoamerica to the catacombs beneath Mediterranean palaces. The most common design used counterweight steps anchored on a central pivot, balanced to remain rigid until a certain weight threshold was crossed. The Maya perfected a version where the stair's underside was hollowed out and filled with sand. Step too firmly, and the sand would drain through hidden channels, shifting the balance until the stair flipped like a gruesome teeter-totter. But the cruelest iterations were those with delayed triggers. In one Persian tomb, the first 3 stairs were solid, lulling intruders into complacency before the 4th sent them plummeting into a cistern of quicklime. The message was clear: trust nothing, not even the ground beneath your feet. What made the illusory staircase so devastating was its exploitation of deeply ingrained behavior. Stairs represent order, predictability, a universal language of ascent and descent. Our brains don't question them. We navigate steps on autopilot, our muscle memory overriding caution. Ancient engineers weaponized that reflex. Some staircases even mimicked wear patterns, their edges artificially rounded to suggest generations of safe use. A thief might scrutinize walls for hidden blades or test floors for pressure plates, but who thinks to tap every stair with a hammer? The aftermath was as much psychological as physical. Unlike sudden traps that killed instantly, the illusory staircase often left survivors, those who managed to grab the edges as they fell. their screams echoed up the shaft, warning companions still on solid ground. This created a paralyzing dilemma: proceed and risk the next step, or flee and abandon the treasure. In Egyptian tombs, some stair pits were lined with hieroglyphs depicting the god-set trickster deity of chaos, grinning as he tripped figures into the underworld. The symbolism was unmistakable. Chaos always lurked beneath the surface of order, and then there's the chilling simplicity of its maintenance. While complex mechanisms corroded over centuries, a pivoting stair needed no ropes or gears, just perfectly calibrated balance. Modern explorers in Guatemala encountered a Mayan staircase that still functioned flawlessly after a millennium, its limestone counterweights worn slick but deadly as ever. It's a reminder that some traps don't just endure, they wait, patient as gravity itself, for the next footfall to send them crashing down. Because in the end, the greatest trick wasn't hiding danger, it was making danger look like the one thing no one fears. The most dangerous traps weren't always the ones you could see sometimes. The deadliest weapons were words carved in stone. The cursed inscriptions found in royal tombs weren't just decorations, they were psychological landmines designed to burrow into the minds of intruders and fester there long after they'd fled. Picture this: you're standing in a dim corridor, your torch flickering over hieroglyphs that suddenly twist into a threat. The gods will seize your soul like a bird in flight, or he who disturbs this tomb shall drown in his own blood. Even if you didn't believe in curses, the weight of those words pressed down like a physical force, turning every shadow into a specter and every creak of stone into a whispered warning. History shows these curses weren't just empty threats, they had teeth. After the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, newspapers sensationalized the curse of the pharaohs when several expedition members died under mysterious circumstances. While modern science attributes these deaths to mold spores or coincidence, the psychological toll was undeniable. Thieves who ignored such warnings often reported vivid nightmares, unexplained illnesses, or freak accidents, like the infamous case of a 19th-century tomb raider who broke his leg in 3 places days after stealing an amulet inscribed with a curse. Whether supernatural or not, the power of suggestion became a self-fulfilling prophecy, amplifying every stumble, every fever, into proof of divine wrath. But the real genius of these inscriptions lay in their specificity. Some curses targeted not just the thief, but their entire bloodline. His children shall wither like plucked grain. Others played on cultural taboos, like the Egyptian curse threatening trespassers would die without mourners, a fate worse than death in a society obsessed with the afterlife. In China, imperial tombs bore warnings of 10,000 generations of misfortune, a phrase so potent it deterred even the most skeptical looters. The inscriptions weren't just threats, they were mirrors, reflecting each era's deepest fears back at those who dared to defy them. And then there's the chilling reality that some curses may have been chemically reinforced. Archaeologists have found traces of toxic pigments in certain tomb inscriptions, mercury-laced paints or arsenic-infused carvings that could slowly poison anyone who touched them. The Maya took it further, embedding obsidian shards into cursed tablets. Brush against one, and your skin would bleed as if the words themselves had come alive. These weren't just psychological traps, they were physical ones disguised as superstition, blurring the line between myth and mechanism. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is how these curses transcended time. While sand traps filled and blade mechanisms rusted, words endured, their power growing with each retelling. Even today, archaeologists hesitate before certain inscriptions, not because they believe in magic, but because millennia of human fear have imbued those carvings with a weight no trap could match. Because in the end, the deadliest curse wasn't the one etched in stone, it was the one writ large in the trembling hands of those who read it. The labyrinth wasn't just a barrier, it was a slow, deliberate unraveling of the mind. Imagine stepping into a tomb, torch in hand, only to find yourself facing corridor after identical corridor, each one a perfect mirror of the last. The walls bear the same carvings, the floors the same wear patterns, but no matter how far you walk, you never reach the center. Hours blur into days as thirst claws at your throat, your footsteps echoing endlessly in the dark. This was the labyrinth's true horror. It didn't just kill, it made you complicit in your own demise, your stubborn hope luring you deeper into its grasp. Archaeologists have uncovered these nightmare-inducing designs across cultures, each with its own cruel twist. In Crete's legendary underground complexes, some passages looped back on themselves with such precision, even seasoned explorers couldn't detect the curvature. The Egyptians took it further, building labyrinths where hidden hydraulics shifted entire walls overnight. A thief who marked his path would return to find the scratches now leading into a solid stone face. But the most terrifying examples came from the Maya, who engineered labyrinths with sloping floors that secretly funneled intruders in circles, their own momentum betraying them. What made these mazes so psychologically devastating was their illusion of fairness. Unlike spikes or fire, which struck without warning, the labyrinth offered endless chances, each dead end masquerading as a fresh opportunity. This played on the human brain's refusal to accept futility. We're wired to believe the next turn will be different, even when all evidence says otherwise. Some tombs amplified this torment with faint drafts of air or distant echoes of running water, taunting victims with sensations of nearby escape. Excavations in Turkey revealed skeletons curled beside false exits, their fingers worn to the bone from scratching at unyielding stone. The symbolism here was as calculated as the engineering. In cultures where the afterlife was a journey, the labyrinth mirrored the soul's perilous path, a physical test of worthiness. To die within one wasn't just failure, it was cosmic judgment, proof the intruder lacked the wisdom or purity to navigate the divine. Modern researchers in Central America have found labyrinths adorned with star maps, suggesting some were celestial puzzles meant to be solved only by those who understood the heavens. And then there's the chilling efficiency of time. While other traps required maintenance, a labyrinth needed nothing but geometry to endure. The shifting walls in Egypt's Hawara labyrinth still move on moonless nights, their ancient counterweights creaking with the weight of centuries. It's a reminder that some traps don't just outlast their builders, they become living things, growing only more cunning with age. Because in the end, the greatest maze wasn't carved in stone. It was the one etched into the human psyche, where hope itself becomes the deadliest snare. The weight-sensitive floor wasn't just a trap, it was a cruel test of human nature itself. Imagine carefully inching forward in a tomb's shadowy corridor, testing each stone with your fingertips, when suddenly the tile beneath your left foot sinks with an almost imperceptible click. For a breathless moment, nothing happens. Then the walls erupt with movement, spikes descend from above, nets fall from hidden recesses, or worse, the entire floor tilts into a chasm. What made these traps so terrifying wasn't their brutality, but their intelligence. Ancient engineers had mastered the art of discrimination. These floors ignored scuttling rodents, falling debris, even minor tremors, yet reacted with deadly precision to the one thing they were designed to detect: the arrogant weight of a human intruder. Archaeological finds reveal the astonishing sophistication behind these mechanisms. In the tombs of China's Qin dynasty, floor tiles were mounted on intricate bronze springs calibrated to specific weight thresholds, light enough to spare small animals but heavy enough to trigger when a grown adult stepped into the danger zone. The Egyptians took it further, using counterbalanced stone plates that remained stable until uneven pressure, like the staggered steps of a cautious thief, upset their equilibrium. But the real genius lay in the delayed triggers. Some floors featured hidden reservoirs of sand that slowly drained when compressed, creating a deadly pause between activation and consequence. A thief might cross an entire chamber before hearing the sickening crunch of the mechanism catching up behind him. The psychological torment here was masterfully calculated. Unlike obvious pitfalls or swinging blades, weight-sensitive floors offered no visual warnings. Their surfaces were often identical to safe tiles, same color, same wear patterns, forcing intruders into an agonizing game of chance. Some cultures amplified this dread by placing valuable artifacts directly on the lethal tiles, knowing greed would override caution. Excavations in Turkey uncovered a tomb where the skeletons of ancient looters still clutched golden bowls, their bodies pinned beneath stone blocks that had dropped minutes after they'd picked up their prizes. What's chilling is how these traps exploited fundamental human instincts. Our brains are wired to recognize immediate cause and effect. Step on a pressure plate, hear a click, expect instant danger. But delayed reactions short-circuit that survival mechanism, leaving victims disoriented and vulnerable. The Maya perfected this torture with floors that grew progressively more unstable with each step, like walking on a frozen lake that cracks only after you've ventured too far to retreat. Modern engineers testing replicas have marveled at how these ancient designs anticipated principles used in today's security systems, discriminating between authorized and unauthorized entry with eerie precision. And then there's the grim poetry of their endurance. While ropes decayed and metal corroded, stone and gravity remained constant. In 2019, researchers in Peru discovered a functioning weight-sensitive corridor after 2 millennia, its limestone counterweight still perfectly balanced, waiting for the next footfall to complete a circuit begun centuries ago. It's a reminder that these weren't just traps, they were timeless judgments weighing human arrogance against engineering genius and finding intruders forever wanting. Because in the end, the deadliest flaws weren't the ones that collapsed immediately, but the ones that let you believe, just for a moment, that you'd gotten away with it. Polished to a supernatural gleam, the mirrored surfaces in these tombs didn't just reflect, they deceived. Imagine raising your torch in a cramped burial chamber, only to watch its flame multiply endlessly across walls of burnished bronze, stretching the room into an infinite labyrinth of flickering light. Your own terrified face stares back at you from a dozen angles, but worse, your path fractures with it. Was that corridor real or just another trick of the light? This was the mirror illusion, a trap that turned the simplest human instinct, trusting your own eyes, into a fatal weakness. Ancient engineers understood something profound about perception, that confusion could be deadlier than any blade. In Egypt's most elaborate tombs, concave metal mirrors were strategically placed to distort depth, making a 3-foot drop appear like a bottomless chasm or a solid wall seem like an open passage. The Maya took it further, embedding sheets of obsidian so smooth they became one-way windows. Looters would see their own reflections moving independently, as if specters were tracking them through the dark. But the cruelest designs used mirrors to manipulate light itself. Chinese imperial tombs featured angled bronze plates that focused sunlight into searing beams, turning midday explorations into a deadly game of dodging what essentially were ancient laser traps. The psychological toll was as calculated as the engineering. Unlike physical traps that left visible threats, mirrors weaponized uncertainty. A thief might spend hours retracing his steps, convinced he was walking in circles, when in reality, the mirrors had him trapped in a space no larger than a closet. Some tombs amplified this terror with sound whispers bouncing between reflective surfaces until they seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Excavations in Crete uncovered a chamber where the ceiling was entirely mirrored, so anyone looking up would see their own inverted reflection, a visual trick so unsettling, modern archaeologists reported vertigo just standing beneath it. What's chilling is how these illusions blurred the line between defense and art. Many mirrored surfaces were engraved with hypnotic spirals or fractals, patterns known to induce trance-like states. Others were positioned to align with celestial events during solstices. Sunlight would ricochet through a tomb's mirrors, illuminating hidden warnings or, in some cases, igniting flammable materials. This wasn't just misdirection, it was a cosmic lock timed to the movements of the heavens. And then there's the mirror's silent endurance. While metal corroded and stone eroded, a well-polished mirror could retain its deceptive power for millennia. In 2017, conservators in Turkey restored a bronze mirror from a Phrygian tomb after minimal cleaning. It still reflected with near-perfect clarity, warping the room like a funhouse illusion. It's a reminder that some traps don't need spikes or poison to kill. Sometimes all it takes is showing a thief his own desperate face one too many times until madness becomes the final, inescapable snare. Some tombs didn't just listen for intruders, they waited for them. The sound-based trap turned every footstep, every whisper into a potential death sentence. Imagine this, you're deep inside a burial chamber, the air thick with the scent of centuries, when your companion accidentally knocks over a bronze vase. The metallic clang echoes through the corridor, and then something far worse echoes back. A rhythmic creaking builds overhead as a massive pendulum blade detaches from the shadows, swinging faster with each pass, its edge honed to a razor's gleam. This wasn't just a trap, it was a gruesome orchestra where sound conducted the instruments of death. The engineering behind these acoustic nightmares reveals a chilling understanding of physics. In Egypt's labyrinthine tombs, hollow chambers were designed to amplify specific frequencies like the pitch of a chisel striking stone or the resonance of a shout triggering counterweights that released hidden hazards. Archaeologists in one Theban tomb discovered a network of tuned bronze pipes hidden behind false walls. When struck by echoes, they vibrated just enough to trip a mechanism, unleashing a cascade of stone blocks. But the Maya took it further, constructing entire chambers where the walls themselves acted as sound mirrors. A single clap could focus acoustic energy onto a thin ceramic seal, shattering it to release a flood of water or venomous insects from concealed cavities. What made these traps uniquely terrifying was their selectivity. They ignored the scuff of rodents or the drip of groundwater, reacting only to the frequencies of human activity. Some were tuned to the exact pitch of panic. A scream at a certain decibel might trigger spikes from the floor, while a whispered prayer could remain harmless. This wasn't accidental, it was psychological warfare. Thieves would tiptoe in silence, only to freeze in horror when a partner's cough set off a chain reaction. Excavations in China's Hubei province uncovered a tomb where skeletons lay clustered beneath ceiling hooks, their jaws locked in eternal screams, victims of a trap that punished noise with noise, their own terror sealing their fate. The implications go beyond mere security. These designs prove ancient cultures mastered acoustics long before concert halls or microphones. A Chinese emperor's tomb featured singing stones that emitted ultrasonic frequencies when disturbed, inaudible to humans but triggering bats to swarm the intruders. The Greeks used hollow statues with reed-filled throats. Wind passing through them created eerie wails that not only scared looters but also masked the sounds of other traps resetting. This wasn't just engineering, it was artistry, transforming sound into both weapon and illusion. And then there's the haunting legacy of these traps. While most mechanisms have decayed, their principles endure. In 2021, researchers mapping a Peruvian pyramid with lasers stumbled upon a chamber that still resonated at 64 Hz, the exact frequency of a human groan. Whether by design or eerie coincidence, the tomb remembered what its builders knew, that in the darkness, even a gasp could be the last sound you ever make. Because the deadliest traps weren't always the ones you could see, sometimes they were the ones that listened. Tombs didn't just rely on stone and metal to guard their secrets, some unleashed the animal kingdom itself. While snakes were a common threat, other rulers turned to creatures far more unpredictable. Scorpions with venom that could stop a heart in minutes, spiders whose bites induced paralyzing hallucinations, even big cats like leopards or lions, starved into a frenzy and left to prowl the shadows. These weren't just wild animals, they were living weapons, their instincts sharpened into razor-edged traps. In Egypt's western oases, archaeologists found chambers lined with ceramic jars still housing the desiccated remains of deathstalker scorpions, their tails poised as if ready to strike even after millennia. The message was clear: cross this threshold and nature itself would judge you. What made animal guardians uniquely terrifying was their ability to learn. Unlike a pressure plate or falling boulder, creatures could adapt. A scorpion might retreat into a crack after its first sting, waiting to ambush the next intruder. Big cats, often captured as cubs and raised in tomb antechambers, grew to associate humans with food or threats. By the time a thief encountered them, these animals were neither tame nor fully wild, but something far worse: desperate, territorial, and utterly without mercy. The Maya took this further, engineering entire ecosystems within tombs. In one Guatemalan pyramid, researchers uncovered a network of vents designed to funnel bats into burial chambers, their frenzied flights disorienting looters while triggering secondary traps. The psychological torment was as deliberate as the biology. Ancient engineers knew that fear of the unknown was sharper than fear of the predictable. A blade trap might kill you, but a scorpion could leave you writhing for hours, your muscles seizing as venom coursed through your veins. Some cultures amplified this terror by combining animals with other traps. Imagine triggering a false floor only to drop into a pit of spiders, their silken webs strung across bronze spikes to slow your fall. Excavations in Persia revealed skeletons surrounded by the tiny bones of venomous ants, their mandibles still clamped onto finger bones centuries later. But perhaps the cruelest twist was how these traps mirrored the natural order. In cultures where animals symbolized divine forces, their presence wasn't just practical, it was poetic. A lion guarding a pharaoh's tomb echoed the sun god's power. Scorpions embodied the judgment of the underworld. Even the animal's suffering served a purpose. Starvation heightened aggression, but it also made them relentless. A famished leopard wouldn't just kill, it would hunt, tracking intruders by scent or sound. Modern experiments with replica traps showed that even a single agitated honeybee hive, concealed behind a thin wall, could drive would-be thieves into triggering deadlier mechanisms in their panic. And then there's the haunting legacy of these living traps. While metal rusted and ropes frayed, evolution ensured the animal's lethality endured. In 2019, biologists studying a sealed Mayan tomb discovered a species of blind, cave-adapted spider still thriving in the chambers, its venom twice as potent as its surface-dwelling cousins. It's a reminder that some guardians never left their posts, because in the end, the deadliest traps weren't just built. They were bred, honed by millennia of instinct, waiting in the dark to prove that nature's wrath outlasts even stone. There's a special kind of horror in realizing you've become part of the exhibit. The self-sealing tomb didn't just kill intruders, it preserved them, turning thieves into permanent fixtures of the very treasure vault they'd come to plunder. Picture this, you've just pried open a royal burial chamber, your hands trembling with triumph, when a low rumble shakes the walls. Behind you, a slab of stone the size of a chariot slides into place, its edges grinding together with terrible finality. No amount of clawing at the seams changes the truth. You're not just trapped, you've been curated, your fate sealed as deliberately as the tomb's original occupant. The engineering behind these nightmares was chillingly elegant. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, some tombs used sand-filled counterweights to disturb the burial chamber, and hidden reservoirs would drain, shifting the balance just enough to send a pre-positioned block crashing across the exit. The Maya took it further, constructing entire passageways lined with limestone plugs. When triggered by a tripwire, the plugs would roll into alignment like beads on a string, each one locking into grooves carved with mathematical precision. But the cruelest designs were those that delayed the sealing. Chinese imperial tombs sometimes employed slow-acting hydraulic systems, giving intruders just enough time to spread out before isolating them in separate chambers, ensuring each thief died alone in the dark. What made this trap uniquely terrifying was its symbolism. Other traps punished the body, this one condemned the soul. To die in a self-sealing tomb wasn't just failure, it was eternal damnation, your corpse left to rot beside the ruler you'd sought to desecrate. Archaeologists in Mycenae uncovered a sealed corridor where two skeletons still clutched at each other, their bones frozen in a grotesque parody of companionship. The walls around them bore scratch marks in overlapping layers, proof that some had survived for days, their final hours spent in the company of ghosts and their own fading screams. The psychological warfare here was masterful. Unlike sudden collapses or dart traps, the self-sealing mechanism often allowed thieves to see their doom approaching. Some tombs featured narrow observation slits, letting trapped intruders watch as their companions futilely tried to shift the stone from the outside. This wasn't just physical entrapment, it was the slow unraveling of hope itself, each passing hour measured in weakening shouts and the creeping cold of subterranean air. And then there's the grim irony of preservation. While other traps left bodies to scavengers or the elements, sealed tombs mummified their victims through sheer isolation. In 2014, researchers in Turkey opened a Bronze Age burial chamber to find a looter's skeleton perfectly preserved, his leather sandals still intact, his fingers curled around a jar of stolen honey, now solidified into amber after millennia. It was a macabre time capsule, proof that these traps didn't just protect treasures, they turned greed itself into a relic. Perhaps the most haunting detail is how these tombs blurred the line between prison and monument. A ruler's final act wasn't just to safeguard his riches, it was to ensure that anyone who challenged his eternal rest would become part of the display, their bones as much a warning as any carved inscription. Because in the end, the self-sealing tomb wasn't just a trap, it was a mirror reflecting the intruder's fate back at him with cold, stone-eyed clarity. The magnetic trap was a silent puppeteer, manipulating the very laws of nature to turn intruders' tools against them. Imagine creeping through a pitch-black corridor, your iron dagger clutched tight, when suddenly an invisible force wrenches it from your grip. Before you can react, the blade clatters against the far wall, leaving you defenseless in the swallowing dark. This wasn't just engineering, it was alchemy, transforming the unseen pull of magnetism into a weapon as lethal as any blade. What made these traps so terrifying was their utter lack of spectacle. No grinding stones, no hissing snakes, just the quiet horror of metal objects moving on their own. Archaeologists in China's Han Dynasty tombs discovered walls embedded with massive lodestones, their pull strong enough to yank bronze tools from belts at 6 paces. The Maya took a subtler approach, lining corridors with magnetite-rich stones that subtly distorted compasses, leaving looters wandering in circles until thirst or secondary traps claimed them. But the cruelest designs weaponized the intruders themselves. Persian engineers suspended magnetic plates above narrow passages so that armor-clad thieves would literally be dragged upward, their own protection becoming a noose of shifting metal. The psychological torment here was masterful. In an era before science demystified magnetism, the effect would have felt like sorcery. Ancient texts described tomb raiders fleeing in terror, convinced the spirits were drinking the iron from their hands. Even the trap's rarity played into their power. Encountering one meant you'd stumbled upon secrets so valuable, rulers had harnessed the cosmos itself to guard them. Modern excavations in Alexandria uncovered a Greek-era tomb where the ceiling glittered with suspended weapons, each one snatched from would-be thieves over centuries, left dangling like metallic fruit in some grotesque harvest. What's chilling is how these traps blurred the line between science and myth. Lodestones were sacred in many cultures, believed to be fragments of fallen stars or the bones of Earth gods. By embedding them in tombs, engineers didn't just create barriers, they built altars to invisible forces, where the punishment for trespassing wasn't just death, but the humiliation of being bested by the very air you breathe. Even now, conservators wear non-metallic gear when exploring certain sites, knowing some traps still hold their ancient charge. Because while blades may rust and ropes decay, magnetism never sleeps. It simply waits, patient as gravity, for the next fool to bring metal into its domain. Nothing lured a thief to his doom quite like the gleam of gold left carelessly in the open. The decoy treasure was the ultimate psychological gambit, a masterstroke of reverse psychology that turned human nature into its own executioner. Imagine stumbling upon a royal tomb to find a golden chalice resting in plain sight, its surface gleaming as if placed there just for you. Your instincts scream trap, but your fingers twitch with greed. That hesitation, that fatal moment of doubt, was precisely what the architects counted on, because the greatest trick wasn't hiding the treasure. It was making you believe you'd outsmarted them by finding it. The craftsmanship behind these death traps was as meticulous as it was malicious. In Egypt's most opulent tombs, archaeologists have uncovered statues coated with translucent layers of aconite, a poison so potent, merely brushing the surface could induce cardiac arrest within hours. The Maya took a more theatrical approach, crafting jeweled chests that emitted harmless smoke when opened, lulling thieves into complacency before the second compartment released a cloud of powdered lime to sear their lungs. But the cruelest designs were those that played on patience. Persian engineers filled decoy urns with slow-acting toxins, ensuring looters would succumb days later, far from the tomb, their deaths untraceable to the treasure they'd stolen. What made these traps uniquely devastating was their intimacy. Unlike a collapsing ceiling or arrow volley, the decoy required the victim's full participation, their hands lifting the artifact, their breath fogging the gemstones as they leaned closer. Some were rigged with hair trigger mechanisms, a golden amulet that fired needles when tilted, a goblet whose stem released scorpions when raised. Excavations in Macedonia revealed a skeleton still clutching a silver diadem, its hollow interior packed with arsenic-laced resin that had liquefied over centuries, preserving the thief's bones in a ghastly amber embrace. The symbolism here was as calculated as the mechanics. In cultures where grave goods were sacred, stealing them wasn't just theft, it was sacrilege. A poisoned artifact became divine retribution, its beauty a veil for vengeance. Chinese tomb inscriptions often warned that stolen treasures would turn to fire in the hands of the unworthy, a threat made literal in some Han Dynasty burials where gilded objects concealed flammable white phosphorus. The moment air hit them, they'd ignite. Leaving would be thieves with hands full of flame and no time to scream. And then there's the lingering horror of the traps that didn't kill. Some decoys were designed to maim rather than murder: a chest that snapped shut on wrists, a statue that sprayed blinding acid. These victims became walking warnings, their missing fingers or scarred faces advertising the tomb's wrath to anyone who might follow. Modern conservators still wear thick gloves when handling certain artifacts, not because they fear ancient curses, but because physics and chemistry offer no expiration date on ingenuity. A 2,000-year-old spring-loaded blade might still have tension. A dried toxin could reawaken with a single drop of sweat. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how these traps blurred the line between gift and grenade. A decoy treasure wasn't just a weapon, it was a test, offering intruders a choice that was no choice at all. Take nothing and leave empty-handed. Take the bait and forfeit your life. In the end, the real treasure was never the gold, it was the lesson, hammered home with lethal clarity. Some desires are better left buried. The statues standing sentinel in these tombs weren't just decorations. They were dormant executioners, frozen in stone until the moment an intruder dared to breathe life into them. Picture this: you're tiptoeing past what appears to be an ordinary funerary statue, its blank eyes staring into the darkness, when suddenly its bronze fingers twitch. Maybe it's a trick of the flickering torchlight until the entire figure lurches forward with a grinding of ancient gears, its spear tip glinting as it arcs toward your throat. This was the Eternal God, a masterpiece of psychological terror that blurred the line between machine and monster. Ancient engineers achieved this illusion through fiendish ingenuity. In Alexandria's underground catacombs, archaeologists discovered statues mounted on hidden tracks, their bases concealing counterweight systems that allowed them to glide forward when tripwires were disturbed. The Maya took it further, crafting hollow figures filled with rattling pebbles. Any vibration would make the statue emit an eerie chattering sound, as if whispering curses to itself. But the most chilling examples came from China's Qin dynasty, where terracotta warriors were occasionally rigged with crossbows in their hollow torsos, their outstretched arms becoming firing mechanisms when certain tiles were stepped on. These weren't just traps, they were theatrical performances where the props fought back. What made the Eternal God uniquely horrifying was its defiance of natural law. Humans instinctively categorize objects as animate or inanimate. When that boundary collapses, primal fear takes over. Some cultures amplified this effect with clever tricks. Statues with hollow eye sockets that seem to track movement thanks to reflected light, or articulated jaws that dropped open to reveal rows of actual human teeth. A 1st-century Roman tomb near Pompeii featured a bronze guardian whose face was polished to a mirror-finish. Thieves reported seeing their own terrified expressions warp and twist as the statue pursued them through the corridors. The legacy of these constructs echoes through history, evolving from mechanical marvels into myth. Medieval accounts of golems and Arabian tales of jinn-bound automata likely stem from encounters with ancient tomb guardians. Even today, certain remote cultures speak of stone men in burial mounds that turn their heads to watch the living, a testament to how effectively these traps colonize the human imagination. Modern engineers recreating these mechanisms have marveled at their sophistication. One Han Dynasty statue used a water-powered escapement mechanism not unlike early clockwork, proving that the desire to make stone bleed life is as old as civilization itself. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how these guardians transcended their original purpose. While other traps were single-use weapons, the Eternal God became part of the tomb's identity. Looters might disarm a pressure plate or avoid a pit, but how do you kill something that was never alive to begin with? In the end, these silent sentinels achieved what no mere mechanism could. They made the tomb itself feel awake, watching, and hungry. Even with cutting-edge technology at our fingertips, the tombs of ancient rulers still guard their secrets with lethal efficiency. Just last year, a research team in Peru lost $1 million robotic probe to a pressure-sensitive floor mechanism in a previously unexplored Moch pyramid, crushed to scrap metal before the cameras could transmit more than 3 seconds of footage. The incident wasn't just a setback. It was a humbling reminder that modern engineering still struggles to match the ingenuity of civilizations that thrived thousands of years before microchips or lithium batteries. Drones with thermal imaging now scout ahead in Egyptian burial shafts, only to trigger dormant sand traps that clog their rotors mid-flight. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hidden chambers in Chinese imperial mounds, but no scanner can detect if the air inside contains enough hydrogen sulfide to drop an excavator before they take a second breath. What makes these discoveries so electrifying isn't just their danger, it's their unpredictability. In Turkey's Mount Nemrut region, archaeologists mapping a Commagene royal tomb with laser scanners accidentally activated a 2,000-year-old gas trap by disturbing a seemingly innocuous ventilation shaft. The chamber flooded with carbon dioxide so rapidly, their sensors spiked to lethal levels within 90 seconds. Yet 3 feet away, another team worked safely in an identical corridor, proving these ancient architects could calibrate death with surgical precision. Even more perplexing are the phantom triggers, mechanisms like those found in a Mayan pyramid at El Mirador, where certain traps activate during specific lunar phases. The current theory, underground water tables shift the tomb's internal balance at predictable intervals, turning celestial cycles into a security system no human guard could replicate. The ethical dilemmas these traps pose are as complex as their engineering. When robotic explorers in Qin Shi Huang's necropolis revealed crossbows still loaded and tensioned after 2 millennia, the debate reignited. Should we dismantle history's deadliest puzzles or preserve them as the ultimate testaments to ancient brilliance? Some argue disarming traps erases their cultural context, like scrubbing the warning hieroglyphs from an Egyptian tomb's entrance. Others counter that leaving them active makes archaeologists complicit in potential future deaths. The compromise, non-invasive digital disarmament, where 3D mapping and AI simulations recreate trap mechanics without physical interference. At Teotihuacan, researchers recently used this approach to study a mercury-filled chamber's lethal hydraulics, solving a mystery that had stumped historians for centuries while leaving the toxic time capsule undisturbed. Perhaps the most haunting realization is how little we still understand. In Cambodia's Angkor complex, LiDAR scans uncovered a network of underground channels beneath a royal tomb channels that flood unpredictably during monsoon season, suggesting the entire structure might be one colossal water-powered death maze. And in Sudan's Nubian pyramids, perfectly preserved skeletons from the 1930s lean against walls adorned with Greek graffiti, proving even early archaeologists fell victim to traps they assumed were long dormant. These aren't relics, they're living puzzles, evolving with each rainfall and earthquake, their creators' minds still outmaneuvering us across the gulf of centuries. The greatest lesson these tombs teach isn't about the past, it's about humility. For all our satellites and algorithms, we're still the mice in their maze, and the architects long turned to dust still hold the blueprints. From psychological warfare to mechanical marvels, these 26 booby traps reveal more than just ancient security measures. They lay bare the very soul of the civilizations that built them. Each mechanism, whether a collapsing ceiling or a poisoned needle, wasn't merely about stopping thieves. It was a declaration etched in stone and steel. These tombs whispered a ruler's final command to the living: My power doesn't end with death. The traps embodied a trifecta of human obsession, control over the afterlife, reverence for the divine, and a chilling mastery of engineering that still leaves modern experts in awe. Consider the symbolism woven into every design. The Egyptians didn't just bury their pharaohs with treasures. They surrounded them with traps mirroring the trials of the underworld, shifting sands echoing the chaos of Juwat, venomous snakes embodying Apophyse's eternal threat. In China, crossbows rigged to fire at intruders weren't just weapons. They mirrored the precision of celestial archers from imperial mythology. Even the simplest pitfall carried layers of meaning. A collapsing floor wasn't just a physical drop, but a fall from grace, a literal plunge into judgment. These weren't random hazards, they were morality plays carved in stone, where greed always met a gruesome finale. Yet for all their brutality, these traps also showcase humanity's boundless ingenuity. The same cultures that revered the sacred with one hand engineered nightmares with the other. The Maya, who charted the stars with unmatched precision, also calculated the exact slope to make a corridor flood in seconds. The Romans, whose aqueducts revolutionized cities, repurposed hydraulic engineering to drown tomb raiders in pitch-black chambers. It's a paradox that defines our species. We reach for the sublime while perfecting the sinister, our greatest minds often pivoting between creation and destruction. What's equally fascinating is how these traps transcended their original purpose. They became legends, shaping folklore long after their mechanisms rusted. Medieval tales of cursed treasures and animated statues likely stem from encounters with ancient tomb defenses. Even today, archaeologists half expect Indiana Jones-style perils when breaking new ground, not because they believe in magic, but because history has proven reality can be stranger than fiction. The terracotta army's crossbows, still tensioned after millennia, or the mercury rivers of Qin Shi Huang's tomb, still evaporating toxic fumes, remind us that the past isn't always passive. Some dangers refuse to fade. So which trap lingers in your imagination? The deceptive elegance of the false door, where beauty concealed impaling spikes, the primal terror of the sand trap, swallowing screams as effortlessly as footsteps. Or perhaps the psychological mastery of cursed inscriptions, where words alone could paralyze with dread. These tombs don't just challenge modern explorers, they challenge us to reconsider what we're capable of. After all, every trap was born from a human mind, a reminder that brilliance and brutality often share the same blueprint. The past never really dies. It waits, sometimes patiently, sometimes with bared teeth for those bold or foolish enough to disturb it. But for every booby trap that succeeded, countless others failed, their secrets now laid bare by time. And that's the ultimate lesson. No matter how clever the design, no matter how fearsome the legend, curiosity always finds a way. So stay curious, keep exploring, and remember history's greatest wonders often lie just beyond its deadliest defenses.